Hello, this is my presentation on students with visual impairments for Dr. T's class, SED 3600-001. My name is Carl Bolter, and I would like to also take a moment to thank Dr. T for being understanding about my little bout of illness the last couple weeks, and which really tore up my voice. And I've been on the mend from, but I'm feeling a lot better. I can talk again. And here is my presentation. Better late than never. So here we go. Students with visual impairments. So research materials are taken from our textbook, including Students with Special Needs, a practical guide for classroom teachers by Marilyn Friend and William Bursick, 8th edition. So that's where I'm pulling everything from, and that is the typical disclaimer. So what is visual impairment? So that is vision loss in which the student cannot successfully use vision as a primary channel for learning, or has such reduced visual acuity or visual field that processing information visually is significantly inhibited and specialized materials or modifications are needed. Now, some students have partial sight and can learn successfully using magnification devices and other adaptive materials. So often we view visual impairment as just complete blindness, and we have these images of like students with like dark glasses on and like little canes to get around the school and stuff like that. But visual impairment can also be partial sight, uh, so something kind of worse than my glasses wearing, but that's not complete blindness. And there are adaptive ways that they can achieve their learning that is separate from someone who is completely blind. And those students who are completely blind do not use any vision as a means of learning and instead rely primarily on touch and hearing to interact with the world around them. So that's more of the traditional blindness that we think of, or that we see in the media, or that we just see in our day-to-day lives. There's a gentleman who lives on my street who has a seeing eye dog, and he's able to go running with the dog and all that stuff, but he's completely blind. So that's the two differences between the visual impairment definitions. Students with visual impairments often experience learning difficulties simply because they cannot easily use vision to process information. And this kind of goes back to our maybe like our preconceived biases. Like we walk into a classroom, we can just sit down, we can read the board, we could read what's on a screen, we can just go about our day without really thinking about it. We could find our professor's office or other academic facilities on campus just by just reading some signs, and we just don't really think about it. We just kind of walk about our day and do all that. But someone with visual impairment, they can't do that. And we have to be cognizant of that as educators. Such as when other students are using maps and globes to learn geography, a visually impaired student has no frame of reference for the lesson because they cannot see a map. So we can't just assume, oh, I'm going to do this lesson and never can do it, because if you have a visual impaired student, you're going to have to figure out a workaround for what to you is just a very simple assignment of color in some countries on a piece of paper, or find me, the capital of, Istanbul or something like, we can't just do that. We have to be very mindful of who is in our class. Students with visual impairments vary in their social and emotional development as well. They cannot see a person's face to maintain eye contact, or they stand too close to their peers because they cannot visually ascertain a distance. And that is also something apart from lesson planning. It's just the social dynamics of a classroom that we need to be aware of. We have to help our other students who are not visually impaired realize that the student or students who are, uh, anything they do is not out of some sort of malice or some sort of need for attention. They might get too close to someone because they just don't know where that person is. They also might not maintain eye contact because they literally can't see someone else's eyes. And we have to teach our students and ourselves that that's okay, that they are just as welcome in this classroom as anyone else. And so we have to be really mindful of that as well, apart from potentially changing our lesson plans a little bit. As an instructor with visually impaired students, here are some best practices for classroom accommodations. Recite out loud what is written on the board. Just don't write something, repeat it clearly and concisely. So a visually impaired student just knows what's going on in the classroom. Call upon students by name so the visually impaired child can associate name with voice. That way, they begin to recognize that if they hear someone talking, they know that this is Samantha or this is Alejandro. That they can make these connections, and it's just as simple as us as an educator just calling on a student by their name, so then their voice is recognized by the child who cannot see them. Allow the student to move closer to demonstrations and displays. And this is more for someone who has partial sight. That if they just needed to have like an extra leg up by just being much closer to where you're working or much closer to where you're demonstrating something to the entire class, you have to make those accommodations, and those are really easy to do. They just need to have that little extra push to see what's happening. Give specific directions instead of using general words such as here or there, and also don't point. Don't like point and expect the student to see what you're pointing at. Don't be vague with visually impaired students in the classroom. And again, that kind of goes back to like our biases and just how we live our life. Like I could just make a very generalized statement to someone and just not even think anything of it. But for someone who literally cannot see the world around them, that's just kind of embarrassing and just kind of drawing attention to them. We have to be mindful not to do that. If possible, assign the visually impaired student with a peer buddy to help them navigate the classroom in school. And this is a point I thought was really interesting. Uh, we experience it in our classes. There's always that student that wants to go the extra mile and also wants to be really, really helpful. And this is a great opportunity for them to meet a visually impaired student and get to know someone different than themselves. And then that student is also aided around the school and in the classroom setting. And this shouldn't be like set up in such a way where it's like the student who can see is like a seeing eye companion for the visually impaired student. It should be like a partnership. It should be just someone who's here to help if need be, and someone who's there so the student doesn't feel like they're going through the classroom alone, that they're not just isolated. So I thought that was a really good tip. Give the student additional time to complete assignments in class or as homework. You have to be flexible with your deadlines because that student doesn't have the advantages that I may have. So I have to be flexible. Plan alternative learning opportunities for visually impaired students. And if the visual impairment is mild, make sure to seat the student within the classroom to optimize visual learning. And so if they have the partial sight, um, move them where they say that they can see best in the classroom, where they can uh, pick up on things happening and literally learn with their peers. There are some different learning tools for visually impaired students. Visually impaired students use a large variety of devices to aid them in the classroom. If the student has partial sight, items such as magnifying glass, high index prescription glasses, or brighter lighting can help the student see enough to learn conventionally. And you need to be mindful that the student may need those items during test taking or during something where you don't want to have any notes around or anything. That student may need to have a learning tool with them. And that also might mean that you have to bring maybe some extra lights into your classroom. Maybe they sit in kind of like a corner of the room where you brought some extra lamps in so they can see their book easier or see their handouts easier. So again, it's just about being adaptable and mindful of the students in our care as educators. Computers with the ability to speak or use large fonts can aid partial sight as well as fully impaired students. Dictation programs. You need your class to write an essay, but you have a blind child who can't just sit down and just write an essay. Letting them have different computers with computer programs where they can just speak into the device and it'll type out what they're saying, or also an e-reader that can audibly read the chapter of a text to the student. So often we want someone, or we want our students to take time during a lesson to either read a section or have a quiet reading time, and then they're kind of be asked or quizzed about what they've read. If we're reading like a book, like we're all reading the same novel, like Tale of Two Cities or something like that. Um, Having an e-reader that can read through headphones and actually read the text to the child allows that child to participate in discussions, allows the child to have an essay that they can do. It allows them to be part of the class as a whole because they know what the story is, they know what the book is, they know what all the ideas and all the main points are because the book has been read to them, or the science section of the textbook has been read to them, and they can pay attention and participate that way. For students who read Braille, Assignments and books can be provided in Braille. That's more something you probably work out with the actual like special education teacher at your school or with the district, whoever handles that sort of thing. But again, be mindful, be open to it, be aware how to get those resources if you need them. Also, a GPS device that speaks can aid the student as they move around the school building. You may do everything you can to set up your room as safe and as inviting as you can for a student who's visually impaired, but you're not in control of any other educator in your building, nor of the designer of your school. So potentially a GPS device that can help a student navigate and avoid obstacles that could hurt them. Another very positive learning tool for visually impaired students. So yeah, that is the presentation. There's also a little segment where sometimes visual impairment is also mixed with deafness, and so that's a whole nother um, can of worms essentially to learn and navigate. You almost have to like learn both sides uh, in order to address that fully. So I'm also going to post uh, this little PowerPoint slide video, and then I'm going to find a little YouTube video also explaining visual impairments in students, and I'm going to post that into the comments or into the discussion board as well. So I hope you found this informative and educational, and I hope I said everything all right. I don't typically do presentations like this, so this is a very new experience for me as well. So thank you all for your patience, and thank you all for following along. And I am looking forward to your feedback. Have a great night.